When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Connect to the world with special Turkish Airlines fares. Book your flight before November 30th and take advantage of great deals. Fly to the most exciting destinations with the award-winning airline that flies to more countries than any other. Terms and conditions apply. For more details, visit turkishairlines.com. Turkish Airlines, widen your world.
Slow Burn Media, an evergreen podcast, presents Who Killed, a podcast that provides a voice for the voiceless.
The Worcester County District Attorney says the evidence collected in the Molly Bish murder case will be submitted for enhanced DNA testing. Next Monday, it will be 16 years since Molly Bish disappeared from Cummins Pond in Warren back in 2000. The 16-year-old had been a lifeguard at the pond when she disappeared on June 27th. Her remains were found in a wooded area in Palmer nearly 3 years later. The upgraded tests will become available in September, and the improvement in testing could make degraded samples usable for determining DNA.
Right now, a new search is underway in the Molly Bish case. Nearly 17 years ago, the teen disappeared from her job as a lifeguard. Her remains were found 3 years later. Today, investigators are using ground-penetrating radar to search a campground a few miles away from where Bish was last seen. They believe a car possibly connected to the case may be buried there. No one has ever been charged in connection with Molly Bish's death.
Case is about to get more national attention. A special on her abduction and murder is scheduled to air tonight on cable. Bish was last seen in June of 2000 when her mother dropped her off at her lifeguard job at a pond in the town of Warren, Massachusetts. Her remains were found 3 years later. The case remains unsolved. Her family hopes the special will generate new leads.
Before we get started this week, I just wanted to let you guys know that this conversation was meant to be just a one-parter, but as things go with Nick, we of course talked for longer than that, and we are going to split this into 2 episodes. The joy is we actually talk about 2 different cases, so this week we will be talking about Molly Bish, and then next week we will be talking about the case of Honey and Barry Sherman. And this is a brand new episode with Nick from True Crime Garage. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to episode 192 of Who Killed. I am your host, Bill Huffman, and this is a Slow Burn Media, Killer Podcasts, and Evergreen Podcast production. On this week's episode, I am once again joined by everybody's favorite guest. And who do you think that is? It's Nick from True Crime Garage. How are we doing today, Nick?
Great. Thank you for the nice introduction, and it's wonderful to be here chatting true crime again, once again here with you, Bill. Normally we do this over a couple of cups of coffee in the AM hours. Today we're doing it later in the day, so much brighter out there, a little hot here in Ohio. I don't know how hot it is out there, but we got a little heat index today.
Let's say I'm feeling what the rest of the country is feeling. Denver is, let me look at the temperature. I believe we are sitting at 90, but we're actually at 88. So not bad, but it is a lot less humid in Denver than it is in Ohio. So I'm assuming it's probably pretty rough down there.
My AC has been running nonstop for several hours now. But hey, funny that we're connecting here today because found myself in a conversation probably a few weeks ago. Your name came up. I was talking with Kelly, who I think was a guest on your show at some point. Is that right? Or you were a guest on her show? And I was talking with the captain, and both of them had a lot of great things to say about you. So, yeah, there's people out there talking about Bill, talking about who killed, and now here I am talking to you and talking on the show.
Well, thanks again, Nick, for always touting my less than stellar, resume. But anyway, it's all great. I don't have 600 episodes under my belt like this kid's going to have, and or do you already have it?
We have surpassed 600.
You're so 600. Oh,
so I'm now in the 600 club. I don't know if you knew that that's a pretty elite group.
That's probably an elite group. And that's pretty impressive because that's what. Did you always do 2 shows a week?
Not always, and then even once we went to 2, we don't always stick to that, and then sometimes we'll do 3 or 4. So we've kind of cheated a little bit. A lot of people do the 1 a week. We decided that you know what, we're going to work twice as hard as everybody else out there. So we got to 600 maybe a little faster than some of the other people out there. We're almost like one of these sports shows, that do 2 or 3 or 4 episodes a week.
Yeah, you're crazy. And that's nuts because you guys have really a great show, and to be able to produce quality content like that on a consistent basis is very difficult. And just commend yourselves for being able to do it, because I know that when I see you guys out and about, you are hands down the biggest draw, and people definitely want to talk your ears off about whatever crime it is that caught their fancy. And on this week's show, we are just going to talk about a couple cases that have been interesting to us that we've kind of covered over the past few years. And I did a specific episode on one Molly Bish, and I am efforting to get Heather, which is Molly's sister, as a guest on Who Killed. We have been in touch via email, so hoping to have her on as well. But as far as the case goes, Molly was, she was it was 2001, and it was in the middle of summer. She was working as a lifeguard, and if you don't know the story, she was living in Warren, Massachusetts, which is like this small town in, the East Coast. And her mom dropped her off at her lifeguarding job at Cummins Pond. And this was, again, on June 27th, 2000. And I think I may have said 2001 earlier, so apologies for that.
You're fine.
But anyway,
June 27th, 2000.
Yeah, so one of the things that happened the day before, she had noticed an interesting character, kind of lurking around the pool or pond area. And, kind of was something that she took note of. But the day that she dropped her off, nothing seemed amiss until her mom actually received a phone call saying that Molly had not actually shown up to work, even though she had been dropped off. So this was, kind of shocking to the whole area, especially since it was so small. And, Maggie's mom drove to the pond, very much like Margaret Mahalovic driving to the school looking for Amy. And, of course, she's not there, but all her stuff is there. So, could you just imagine being this mother who just dropped her daughter off at work and then she's gone? And then you see that phone call.
And from my understanding, too, there's several odd things about this case. The first being, they're reported that she never showed up to work. Well, yeah, she did. We dropped her off at work. It just so happened she was the first one there. And so whatever went down, whatever took place that day, happened before anybody else got there. And now we're sitting here, over 21 years later now, and the case, to me, from what I can see, it looks to me like it's an incredibly active case for being 21 years old.
Yes. there has been some news in the case, and it is very active. I think it's one of those cases very similar to, the cases that's, I don't know, take over a small town, because, you can't forget about that kind of stuff. And if you live in a small community, then, as the expression goes, someone probably knows something. And I think that they've just been striving to get the answers. And then, of course, with the DNA technology that's been improving every year, we see cases solved every other week or every day, for that matter, that are, just getting tested. And there's a backlog in testing. And, the one thing about Molly is that, they did have some DNA to test. So they had hopes that they were going to be able to find this particular suspect via the DNA. Now, with the technology where it is, this particular test did not come back as a match. So that's the current news. But that is basically jumping way ahead of the story, because of the fact that, when Molly did go missing, it was like a whole town thing. Everybody searched. There was a big search party. The family tried to search for her on their own, which you hear all the time, because, you don't think the nefarious thing right away. I mean, you may think that way if you work in true crime, but, she wanted to look and do what she could. And then she finally called the police, and then the state police. And finally there was a big search party, but they didn't find anything. They put out dive team boats, and, they searched the pond and searched the woods. And I mean, they had all the different law enforcement units out, and nothing. Missing flyers. And you think about, like, this area. I mean, it's pretty rural. So they're looking in these woods, and I mean, this is also like the land of Sasquatch sightings and stuff like that. It's so dense, meaning that anything can be hiding and basically in plain sight. So there could have just been something missed that day. Do you think in Molly's case that somebody had been stalking her?
Well, I think the very troubling thing is what you pointed out at the top of the show, right? When mom drops her off the day before, she notices something that catches her eye, and I'm a big believer in intuition, especially that of a mother's intuition. And for whatever reason, she took notice of that man the day before. And I don't know if I would call it stalking, but if in fact that man that she saw the day before is the one responsible, or somebody that was involved in the abduction and later the death of Molly Bish, then yes, it looks to me almost like somebody casing the joint. And these swimming pools too have been notoriously a hot spot for pedophiles. Well,
remember, this is a pond, so it's sort of like, it has that ability, but it has that creepy and eeriness of being able to just kind of disappear into the woods. Like, okay, here's this like road that goes up to this little beach and this little pond, and
but it was a pond that was almost treated as like a community pool.
Absolutely. I mean, they had exactly. I mean, it was, it was treated like an outdoor pool, basically.
And I
had
think
lifeguards.
I think that most of your listeners will identify more with the community pool idea. And so that's kind of where my mind goes, where you think of these community pools that are frequented by youngsters, often run and managed by youngsters as well. And so this would be, if somebody was looking to snatch a teenager, boy or girl, this would be an ideal location for that, unfortunately. And unfortunately, if the day prior, if the events of the day prior were a repeat of the day that she was abducted, well, then he very likely may have seen her there by herself, nobody else there, on scene, and saw an opportunity, right? This could be somebody that was looking for an opportunity and found it and came back the next day hoping that the prior day's events would repeat.
Yeah, and so like we were talking about the guy that the mom had seen before, Maggie, and he was a man sitting in a white car, and she said that he was there for about 20 minutes. So that would creep you out for sure if you're a mother. And
he's just kind of there sitting, smoking cigarettes.
I mean, like, I get it. Like, I take my dog to the park and, there'll be a car in the parking lot. And yeah, you probably look at it and maybe think that maybe something nefarious is going on, but nothing, you don't really think something's going on. But in this particular situation, I mean, it's clear that it was odd enough that her mom mentioned it and remembered it. And this guy was apparently between the age of 45 and 55 and had dark hair, and it was kind of salt and pepper, and that that classic look, had a mustache. And apparently there were other sightings of a white car, but it's a white car, the most common vehicle. It's like a white van. Good luck, finding that. So it's kind of scary to think that this guy could have been sitting there waiting to see her mom pull away and then pull up and be like, hey, what's going on? And then, what happens. But the fact that people did show up at the pond and then never saw this vehicle makes you wonder if like he basically, transported her in his vehicle then.
Well, and the thing here, too, is, look, we've not covered this case on True Crime Garage. I know you've covered it more than once, I believe, on Who Killed. But so I might get into some questions that you may not know the answers to, but I'll throw them out anyway. So from my understanding, Mom and Dad were once leading the charge on keeping Molly's case alive and in the media. And I know that since then, at some point, her sister Heather has taken that over. Heather Bish has taken over leading the charge. Is Mom and Dad still around? Is Mom still with us?
That is a good question. Knowing the time frame, I do not want to say without double checking. So
okay.
I'm just double checking and basically.
So the reason why I'm asking kind of that question that is where my mind goes. So the first thing that I would be thinking, right? We know we get this description of this man that's seen the day before from Mom. And so the first question after I get the complete description and rundown of this person from her, the first question I'm asking Mom is, if you see this person or a picture of this person, would you be able to say, yes, that's him? Right? Because when we know that when she saw this man the day before, yeah, he might have been hanging around. He was lingering. He was there a little too long. But how good of a look did you get? How strong do you feel about your recollection of this man and what he looks like? And so that's my first question that I always ask these witnesses, or here we have what I would refer to as a potential witness, because we do not know who that man was, if he even had any involvement at all.
Sure.
There is one interesting aspect, though, to the man that's spotted in the white car. We don't ever have anybody coming forward to police. As you pointed out, this is a very big case early on in this area.
It was the biggest search in...
a huge case in this area.
It was the biggest search in Massachusetts history at that point in time. And that was... that's insane, because that was 2000.
And so we don't have anybody coming forward saying, yeah, I was over at, Cummins Pond the day before. I was at Cummins Pond the day before, and I was the guy in the white car. I was there because I was dropping somebody off myself, or I was picking somebody up, or I was
taking a break from work.
Yeah, for whatever reason. We don't have that person. So it stands to reason that if that person was local, or even somewhat local, they would have heard of this news, and likely if they were a good person, a good citizen, they would come forward and offer up what information they have. and their information that they have that is very valuable to this case. The main key part would be, I am he. He is I, and I did not have anything to do with this case. You need to move on from the white car. You need to move on from the smoking mustache man.
Yeah, because I mean that's really what they based a lot of it on, and we see that in a lot of other cases too. And when you think about the white car, I talked about it being very abundant as far as like just being a very popular car color. Other people had seen the car, and it was in the area, so it's interesting to think that people did see this individual. Again, he could have been taking a break from work, could have had nothing to do with it. But if he had nothing to do with it, you would think that he might make an effort to come forward to say, hey, you know what? I shouldn't be the guy that you're still continuing to waste all your time pursuing because, there's other people out there. And he never did that.
Well, and the other very troubling thing, too, is that Molly's case is not the only one. There's another case out there that is somewhat similar to this in the same area from years prior. And you wonder, could there be some kind of connection here?
Are we talking about the Holly Peranian case?
Yeah.
There's always been a weird connection to that case. And it does make you wonder what the connection, if there is a connection. You do, you have to, if you're the police, you have to follow up on all these different leads. They were able to discover 125 different white cars that had been registered or around in the area. But, of course, they never identified this guy. And then they have all these leads and they put them into a database, and it's just like there's sometimes too much information. I mean, I know back when Jacob Wetterling's case was going on, they talk about how there were just so many leads that the lead that came in that was actually about the guy that did it just slipped through the cracks. I mean, they did go and look at the car, but they didn't do enough to follow up on it because they had so many other things to look into. And I think the case like this is another example of somebody where the girl is blonde hair, blue eyes, disappears from a pool. It's very, classic, like horror story that you would tell somebody to watch themselves with when they go to work. Make sure you check behind your back before you, whatever, get out of your mom's car or this, that, and the other. But it's one of those things that, to me, the reason why it's still so active that you mentioned is because there's just a lot of people that still are cheering her on, and that's Heather's. Heather is really the main cheerleader, and that's how these cases get solved is, the John Walsh method.
Well, and the thing, too, that I like with Heather, and I hope that she takes you up on your offer to come on your show because
she knows the case better than anybody.
You're exactly right. She knows the case far better than anybody out there. And with the recent news in the case, I've been reviewing some of her interviews or at least interaction that she's had with local media since that news came out. And I encourage people to look at those articles and read them for themselves because she's extremely candid in these articles where she is expressing hope and frustration about the actual investigation and the way that the police are handling the case currently. And she has been clear in the past of saying that she has tasked herself with leading the charge, and she says she's okay with it, but I feel like that's a bit of a compromise where she feels like she has to be okay with it because she has to be her sister's champion and keep the case going. Now, again, I should circle back to what I said earlier, and I still feel this even with all of the with all the information and reviewing Heather's recent comments about the case, I do think this is a very active case, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to have a clear understanding or approval rating of how they're handling the investigation, because I don't know everything that they're doing, obviously. But I feel confident in seeing the activity surrounding the case and knowing that they are actively working it as such.
Yeah, it's definitely a case that I think is garnering more attention because of the case that you brought up earlier, and that was the Holly Peranian case. Now, that happened 7 years prior, but it was in a similar area.
Yeah.
And, again, Molly was eventually found 3 years after. 3 years after she had disappeared. They found some of her clothing and then eventually found her body. But in Holly's case, she went for a walk and never came home. And of course, she was found 10 weeks later in the woods nearby, and of course by local hunters, because hunters always find either dead bodies or mannequins. Never mannequins, but you know what I'm saying. And it's interesting to think that these two cases could be connected, but I'd rather say that the focus should be on getting the right person for Molly's killer, because they did do this DNA test that we were talking about, and the guy that they had thought was this white car man guy smoking cigarettes and salt and pepper hair and looking very 80s in his 2000 car and yada yada yada. And they did some DNA because they found a guy that looked very similar to him, and he had passed away, but he had a son, and he was actually in Ohio in prison. Mm-hmm. So what they did was they went and they tested this, or they got the DNA of this son and tested it to the DNA that they had. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't a match. And there was so much hope at this point when they went to test this one individual that this was the guy, because he looked so much like that composite sketch. So it's kind of one of those double-edged swords where sometimes he looks just like the sketch, and then there's other times he looks nothing like the sketch. And
right. And I, just to kind of, I don't mean to cut you off there, but to overlay my own thoughts on that. I feel like when I'm seeing the older pictures of this individual, Francis Sumner Sr., is the guy that we're talking about. Or Frank Sumner, if he
went by Frank, yeah.
Yep. So Frank Sumner, when I see pictures of him, the older pictures of him, I think you're totally right, because the earlier pictures look a lot like Smoking Mustache Man, and then the later pictures from him later in life, he doesn't look anything like Smoking Mustache Man. In fact, he looks like he had lost some weight. He didn't age very well, which I'm very happy that happened to Frank Sumner. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, because not only does he at one point in his life look like Smoking Mustache Man, but he has a horrible criminal history, and this is a violent sexual predator, or at least he was at one period in his life.
Doesn't matter if you were, at one point in your life, you're a sexual predator. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, as we both know, for some that never changes, and for probably the very few it does. But and there's a multitude of reasons why that and how that can happen. But in this case with Sumner, and I don't have all the details, and frankly, I didn't want to dive too deep into all the details because of pretty gruesome stuff here. But from what I understand, was he was working at a mechanic shop, an auto mechanic shop. I don't know if he owned the shop or if he just worked there, but there was an individual, a customer, that came in, brought their vehicle in there, and somehow he either lured her somewhere or he followed her back to her apartment. I'm a little unclear of those details, but the short of it is he attacks her in a violent rape, and he gets caught for it, and he ends up doing a decent amount of time. This was it was a kidnapping and aggravated rape charges that stem from this 1980 crime. And after a trial in 1982, he's sentenced to like 15 to 18 years, and he ends up getting out. It looks like he served about 15 or 16 years of that sentence. And we know that he's out in 1998. And Molly Bish, she is abducted and then killed in 2000. So he would have been out at that time. And again, not living terribly far from where the whole Molly Bish thing happened.
No, I mean, he fit the profile as far as what people were looking for. Again, when they're looking at the sketch, people get very, very, dialed in on that type of thing. And I think that happens in a lot of cases. So, sketches are great, but they sometimes can be also misleading and deceptive. And I know that's the same thing, but it's still very something to keep aware of when you do sort of look into a case and you start looking at pictures and say, oh, well, that person definitely looks like the composite sketch. Well, there's a lot of people that look like composite sketches because they're just taking a bunch of composites and piecing them together and making a sketch. There's a reason.
Right.
So,
well, and the other thing, too, that investigators lay out and part of their reasoning for having an interest in this individual is that, this horrible crime that we know he's guilty of. There's no question of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm the auto repair people. If you have a violent individual or a predator that works in that industry, it's always extra scary to me because they do have access to different vehicles at the quick. And we know that vehicles typically can be easier to identify and locate than an actual person. And so did he have access to somebody else's car that day? Was he driving one that he was supposed to be working on that was dropped off for a week or whatever, and now he can return it back to somebody and have no, have an extra step there that maybe they find this vehicle on somebody else. That's something to take concern of. But in the end, what we end up learning quite recently is that the DNA comes back and it's not a match to this Frank Sumner Sr.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting and weird to me, though, too, is he remains a person of interest from the information I found per the investigators. Even though the DNA does not match, they're not saying this clears him. In fact, they're saying quite the opposite of saying, well, he still remains a person of interest in the Molly Bish case, which is very intriguing, also incredibly aggravating, I'm sure, for Holly Bish, who is, again, been very candid. Heather Bish, her sister, has been very candid and expressed her discontent with the investigation. And I think a lot of that comes to, and I'm reading between the lines here, so I don't want anybody to hear what I'm not saying. Heather has not stated this stuff that I'm about to throw in my opinion of, but I think what Heather's aggravation is right now is, look, it's peaks and valleys with these investigations and with these cases, and this has gone on for 22 years now, and there's been times where she's had her hopes up, and there's been times when she's been down in the dumps incredibly over this case, and she's hoping for answers. She's wondering if they're ever going to come, and after you have letdown after letdown after letdown, you start to become beaten down, and you start to think this thing is never going to be over. This thing is never going to be resolved. There will never be justice for Molly. That's aggravating. That's sad. It's heartbreaking. And it's also probably, in a way, mind-numbing to Heather and to any of the other Bish family members. But yeah, I think a big problem that she's currently having is I think she feels like there's a lack of due communication to her and the Bish family. I think they're sitting there going, okay, we've done everything that you've asked us to do for 2 decades. And now we know that you are doing this. You're testing this stuff. You're calling this person a person of interest. And now the tests come back. It doesn't match up to him. He's still a person of interest. What's going on? Give us something. Give us something, because peaks and valleys, we're in a really bad valley right now, man. Give us something. Give us something to hang our hat on, and some kind of hope, some kind of light at the end of the tunnel here, because it's dark right now.
Yeah, I mean, she told NBC 10 Boston that, basically, we talked earlier about how the crime scene was handled, and she has got some concerns about that. And she mentions that, the local police, it was a small town, and they didn't have the ability to, really secure a scene. And she says in this quote that they had tunnel vision and focused on Molly's boyfriend initially. And that, of course, that is a investigator's first, tool, is to look at the person closest to them, as far as like a boyfriend or a husband or a family member or something along those lines. So she definitely has some beef with authorities. And so I think this new news of the testing coming back and them saying, well, it doesn't completely rule him out. I mean, she's not too thrilled with that at all from this quote. And she's going, I don't even know what the privilege. I don't even get the privilege of knowing what kind of DNA tests are being done. Instead, they can't tell me with DNA, and that it's been really hard. And she says, over this time, I've earned a doctorate degree. I just feel like there's nothing that I can do that's enough to get the information so that I can sleep at night. That's insane. And, that's frustrating for somebody to hear that from a family member, a sister. Ugh. And
you know what's incredibly weird too is when you review her statements and you watch her interviews, you have 2 things, or at least I do. I have 2 things that happen to me when I watch her interviews. One, I'm inspired.
She is inspiring.
2, I become heartbroken, because you can see she's a person that inspires others to be driven, to be the force, be that force, right? But at the same time, you can see what it's done to her and what it's done to her family, and your heart breaks for the Bish family. And this was a good batch of people in a good part of our country. And I don't know what the deal is with the boyfriend. Maybe you could fill me in on that. Was there reason to look at him other than he's the boyfriend?
I think that's just kind of the first step that you do in any investigation. I'm sure that Heather has more information about that, and I'm sure the police do as well. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe he was either ruled out or passed a polygraph, one of the two, which isn't necessarily foolproof on anything, but it's been a long, over 2 decades now. And if it was him, I'm pretty sure that they would have been able to connect the dots. So, I just, at this point in time, I just hope that the law enforcement that is involved in the case figures out what their next steps are and can at least provide some idea of what those are to the family, because the family is really the only thing that's left to see closure. And I think that, it's only fair to them to actually let them know what's going on. And I don't know. It's just very sad to see something that seemed so promising not turn out.
Yeah, unless you have suspicions of anybody in the family at all at this point. I don't know what or how it could hurt your case if, giving some information or having certain conversations with someone like Heather. We all know and understand how it could hurt a case early on in the investigation. We're talking about 22 years later. Mm-hmm. And back to the boyfriend, too. If this were the boyfriend, you would expect to, in that kind of situation, in that kind of dynamic, you would expect to see a history of violence with this individual over the course of the last 22 years that might remind you, might go, oh, maybe we take a look at him again. Maybe, oh, this is another reason to take a look at this guy here. It seems to me like some of the more public figures, the people that have been kind of publicly named as persons of interest, it appears most of them are deceased by this point.
Yeah, that's the one interesting thing about this case is it was 2000, but a lot of the suspects were older suspects.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like the person the mom saw was an older individual as far as in relation to the age of her daughter, right?
And this is not to say it wasn't
40 to 45 years old.
And and again, it's not to say that was. I mean, if it wasn't Frank Sumner, it's not to say it wasn't somebody else. Right. I mean, she saw somebody in a white car. That's a fact, and you can't take that away. Was it Frank Sumner? Well, we don't believe so at this point, but
and I think there echoes the frustration of Heather, where she's saying, I don't even know what kind of DNA this is. I don't even know what kind of tests that they are doing, because you have these two statements. The DNA didn't match Sumner. He remains a person of interest. Yep. Both of those statements can be exactly true depending on what test and what DNA they were testing.
This is true. But again, just for some clarity for the family, it would be nice after 22 years, or just anything to give them some sense of, where this case is going. And if there is, still DNA to test, because we know that that's not necessarily a unlimited source either.
Right.
I don't know about this case, but in other cases that we've looked at, they only have certain amounts of DNA, and those can be taken up by using them in tests. So let's just hope that they still have some DNA to test.
Well, and again, I want to offer a little bit of hope. This is just one man's opinion sitting in his garage here, but from my review of the case, I feel good that it is this active. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to say, hey, I'm glad that this case after 22 years appears to be active. We have evidence that this is an active investigation by the recent news that came out. And I would put that activity level quite high on the scale for a case that's 22 years old. But I do hope that she comes onto your show or does not give up hope herself and does not give up the fight herself. I don't think that she will, but she has said, and this is a direct quote of Heather Bish, and this would be good reason for you to speak with her. She says, one way or another, I will find out who the person is, whether it's science or a podcast, or if I have to scream from every mountaintop in this country, I will do that. I'm certain that I will find out who this person is. And so I wish Heather Bish all of the very best. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, I think that is a very good quote to leave that on, and this case. But in 2004, Maggie and John Bish they founded the Molly Bish Center and Foundation, and this was in collaboration with Anna Maria College. So they do, they're active. Again, this case, if you look at all the different articles, all the different news updates, I mean, they've never really stopped, as much as there may have been some issues at the beginning. I'm happy to see that they're still continuing to pursue answers. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, this was intentionally meant to be a one-parter, but again, we spoke too long, and next week we will discuss the case of Honey and Barry Sherman. So make sure you guys tune in next week for the conclusion of my summer conversation with Nick of True Crime Garage. And as always, I drop new episodes of Who Killed on Fridays, as well as you can follow me on Twitter at BillHuffman3. Hey, if you want to donate to the show, you can also do that via Venmo with my username at Bill-Huffman-3. Or you can do via PayPal. It's also something that's out there. So, if you like the show and you want to help support it, feel free. Anything helps, and very appreciative of Nick and his time. And I hope you guys enjoyed our conversation today. And again, next week, Nick will take the lead, and he will be talking about the murders of billionaires Honey and Barry Sherman from Canada. And again, thanks so much for tuning in. And as always, stay healthy and be safe.
I'm an American vigilante. I have a question for you. What would you do if someone you cared about was abducted, taken from you? Would you call me? Would you care about how I got them back? Download American Vigilante now.
How far would you go in your pursuit of the American dream? Would you put in the work?
911, what's your emergency?
Would you take a big risk?
What's the problem? What's the problem?
Would you cheat? Would you lie?
Were they shot? Were they shot?
Would you kill?
My mom is dead. My mom is right there.
I'm Jeremy Schwartz, and I'll be taking you inside the minds of some of our most notorious felons and outlaws, exploring the dark side to the American dream. You'll meet the picture-perfect brothers who teamed up to kill their parents, the thief who stole babies and ruined countless lives, the crypto king who siphoned off billions in the name of saving the world, and plenty more. From assassins to gangsters to killers and con artists, whatever the case, whoever the criminal, you don't know the full story until now. Go to AmericanCriminal.com or search for and follow American Criminal wherever you get your podcasts.